The Moose stepped into the road at 6:12 a.m., just as the first line of commuters came around the bend beneath Raven Cliff. At first, everyone thought it was simply an obstacle, a huge one, certainly, but still only that. Route 7 through Alder Pass was narrow, winding, and notorious in winter for black ice and falling rock, but in early autumn it carried a different kind of danger: fog in the low cuts, wet leaves on the shoulder, and wildlife descending from higher timber before the first real cold. Deer crossed often, elk sometimes, black bears once in a while if berry season ran long. Moose were rarer but not unheard of in the upper county, especially near the old quarry road where the runoff ponds drew them in at dawn. Still, no one wanted one standing broadside across both lanes beneath a cliff. The first driver to stop was Hannah Mercer, a physical therapist from Briar Ridge who made the pass every weekday before sunrise. She rounded the corner too fast for comfort, saw a dark shape fill her headlights, and hit the brakes hard enough to send her travel mug flying into the passenger floorboard. The SUV shuddered to a stop 20 feet from the animal. Hannah gripped the steering wheel and stared. The Moose was enormous, a mature bull, though not one of the very biggest, tall enough at the shoulder to make her hood seem absurdly low. Dark brown hide slick with dawn mist, thick neck, long pale legs planted square on the center line. Velvet remnants still clung in ragged strips to one antler tine where the season had recently turned. Steam rolled from his nostrils in the cold air. He was facing the cliff wall, not the forest, not the vehicles, the cliff. Behind Hannah, another car braked, then a delivery van. Within a minute, a small line of vehicles had formed on both sides of the bend because the bull had not only blocked one lane, he had chosen the exact narrowest point in the road, where the rock face pressed close on one side and a guardrail dropped into the river gorge on the other. Normally, a moose startled by engines and lights would have moved off, badly, slowly, maybe angrily, but off. This one did not move. He stood there, head slightly lifted, ears turning, and every so often he shifted one step left or right, only to place himself more firmly in the middle of the road again. Someone behind Hannah honked. The Moose didn't even look back. Another driver leaned out a window and shouted, "Come on!" That changed nothing. The bull lowered his head once, snorted, and stamped a forehoof against the wet pavement. The line of cars went quiet after that. 3 vehicles back sat Deputy Eli Tanner, off duty but in uniform pants because he had been called in early for courtroom transport and was already halfway into town when he hit the backup. Eli was 34, broad, unhurried, and from the sort of family that measured generations by weather, hunting seasons, and who still remembered when the old bridge washed out in '87. He stepped out, took one look at the bull, and muttered, "That's not good." Not because of the moose itself. He had seen moose before, enough to respect them and avoid inventing courage around them. But there was something wrong with the animal's behavior. It wasn't confused in the usual way. It wasn't trying to cross. It wasn't trapped between panic and traffic. It was holding ground. Eli walked up beside Hannah's window and lifted a hand for her to lower it an inch. "How long's he been there?" "Maybe 2 minutes." Eli nodded and looked up at the cliff. Raven Cliff rose sheer above that stretch of road, a dark wall of fractured shale and granite with cedar roots finding impossible holds in the cracks. In heavy rain or hard freeze-thaw, rocks came loose there. The county had put up netting in one section years earlier, but farther down the wall the old stone was naked and unstable. This morning, everything looked still, but still doesn't always mean safe. The moose stamped again. Then, to everyone's confusion, he backed 3 steps down the road toward the waiting cars, forcing the lead vehicles to reverse, before stopping and swinging his head back toward the cliff. Hannah felt a cold line trace itself down her back. "He's not trying to get past us," she said. "No," Eli replied. "He's trying to keep us back." That sounded absurd. It also sounded true. Someone else had arrived by then. State Park's truck, green and white, pulled onto the shoulder as far as it could manage. Ranger Mara Sloan climbed out in a weatherproof jacket with binoculars already in hand. Mara covered wildlife and road response in the pass area. At 41, she had long since stopped underestimating anything that felt almost explainable. She came up beside Eli, took in the moose, the road, the cliff, and the line of idling vehicles, and said only, "What's he doing?" "That's what we'd all like to know," Eli said. Mara watched the bull for 15 full seconds. He never once turned toward the people, never once presented a normal threat display. Every line of his body remained oriented toward the rock face above the road. Then she heard it. A faint cracking sound. She lifted her head sharply. "What?" Eli asked. "Quiet." The wind moved down the pass. Engines idled. Someone in a truck bed coughed. Then there it was again, a dry, splintering tick from high on the cliff. Mara swore under her breath. "Back everybody up," she said immediately. Eli turned without argument and began shouting from one vehicle to the next. "Reverse! Now! All of you, back it up around the curve." At first people resisted, because people always do when they can't yet see the danger for themselves. Then the moose did something that solved the argument. He lunged 2 steps toward the lead row of cars, not charging fully, not enough to hit anyone, but enough that instinct finally overrode irritation. Drivers threw vehicles into reverse. Tires squealed on damp pavement. The line backed around the bend in jerks and corrections while Mara kept her eyes on the cliff, and the moose held his ground exactly where the danger would fall first. Hannah reversed with both hands shaking now. "What is happening?" No one answered, because the cliff answered first. The sound began as a snap somewhere high above, then a crack, then a deep stone groan that seemed to come through the road itself. "Move!" Mara shouted, though the line was already retreating. A boulder the size of a refrigerator broke free from the upper face of Ravencliff and struck the slope below once, twice, then exploded onto the road in a shower of rock and dust exactly where Hannah's SUV had been 30 seconds earlier. Smaller stones followed, then more. The whole cut came alive. Shale, chunks of granite, earth, cedar roots, and debris hammered the pavement in a violent rush that drowned out every human sound for 6 terrible seconds. Dust blew across the curve. One section of guardrail folded under the impact of a secondary rock strike. A delivery van window shattered from flying stone even at the backed-up distance. And when the slide was over, the road beneath the cliff had vanished under a field of broken rock. If the vehicles had remained where they were, the first 4 would have been crushed. There was no room left for doubt after that, no room for coincidence. The moose had been standing in the road beneath the cliff, and everyone who had tried to pass him learned too late that he had been saving them. For a few seconds after the rockfall stopped, no one moved at all. The silence afterward was somehow worse than the noise. It felt shocked, temporary, as if the pass itself was listening to see whether more mountain would come down. Then Hannah began to cry. She did not mean to. It just happened. A hard shaking sound ripped out of her when she looked at the place where she would have been and saw only crushed stone and dust. Eli stood beside Mara in the roadway, both staring through the settling cloud. The moose was still there, not untouched. Dust streaked his shoulders, and one hind leg had taken a glancing hit from something smaller but still standing. He had shifted during the slide, stepping back just enough to avoid the worst of it, then returned to almost the same patch of road as before. Mara said very quietly, "My God." The bull turned his head at last. Not toward the cliff now, toward the humans. For one long second, the whole backed-up line of commuters and locals and delivery drivers looked at the animal differently than they had 7 minutes earlier. Not as a hazard, not as an inconvenience, not as wildlife where wildlife shouldn't be. As witness, as warning, as the only thing on the road that understood before anyone else did. Then the moose snorted once, heavily, turned, and climbed the far ditch in 2 astonishingly graceful strides for such a large creature. He passed through the shattered edge of brush above the road and disappeared into cedar and fog without a backward glance. Only after he was gone did the people start speaking again. It came all at once, shouting, praying, somebody laughing too hard because fear had nowhere else to go, a truck driver swearing with tears in his eyes, a teenage courier repeating, "He knew, he knew, he knew." Mara was already on the radio, voice clipped and controlled because that was how professionals kept panic from getting in through the cracks. Route 7 blocked at Raven Cliff, major rockfall, no fatalities. Repeat, no fatalities. Close both approaches immediately and send road crews. Eli moved from car to car checking for injury. One woman had glass cuts on her cheek. A man in the van had bruised his shoulder on the steering wheel. Hannah's hands shook too hard to hold her phone. But no one was dead. No one was trapped. No one had been under the slide because a bull moose had refused to let them through. By 8:30, state police had shut the pass in both directions. Road engineers came, news crews followed. Social media outpaced all of them. The story grew legs before the dust had even fully settled. Moose blocks traffic before major rockslide commuters. Credit animal with saving lives. On Route 7, drivers learned too late why it stood in the road. The versions multiplied fast. Some said the moose sensed the mountain. Some said it heard the cracking first. Some said it was blind luck and people were romanticizing a traffic jam. Some said no amount of cynicism changed the timing. Mara gave the official line before noon. Large ungulates are highly sensitive to vibration, sound, slope movement, and changing conditions in terrain. It is possible the animal detected instability in the cliff face before human observers recognized it. Its road-blocking behavior is unusual, but the sequence is a matter of record. That was as far as she would go in public. In private, she went farther. That evening, after 12 straight hours of closure reports, witness statements, and one television interview she regretted the entire time it was happening, she sat in the station office with Eli and replayed the scene in her mind. "He kept backing us up," she said quietly. Eli nodded. "Yeah. Not running, not crossing. No. Just holding that spot until we moved." Eli rubbed one hand over his face. "I know." Neither of them tried to explain it after that. The county geologist's report the next day confirmed what Mara had heard before the slide. Deep freeze overnight, water in the cracks, warming at sunrise, one unstable fracture section finally giving way. The fall path matched almost exactly the zone where the lead cars had been stopped. An engineer from the road department said on camera that anyone standing under the cliff at that moment would likely have been killed instantly. Hannah saw that interview from her kitchen and had to sit down. For 3 nights after, she dreamed of the moose standing broadside in her headlights and woke with her heart hammering in the dark. On the 4th day, she drove the long southern detour to work and still gripped the wheel every time the road narrowed. A week later, when the pass partially reopened under single-lane control, somebody had tied flowers to the repaired guardrail at mile marker 84. Not for a person, for the moose. Road crews removed them by evening because flowers on mountain roads turned to trash fast. By the next morning, someone had left apples instead. That made Mara laugh for the first time since the slide. The Wildlife Division later issued a statement begging people not to feed moose in gratitude for public rescue services they had never knowingly volunteered to provide. This only half worked. As for the bull himself, there were 2 more sightings that month. One by a logging crew at dawn near the old quarry pond, where a large bull stood on the bank listening toward the slope before moving off uphill. Another by a school bus driver who swore she saw him in a stand of aspens above the south meadow, one antler catching the light before he disappeared. Same dark shoulders, same ragged velvet strip, same impossible steadiness. Could anyone prove it was the same animal? No. Did anyone in Alder Pass care much about proof after what they had seen? Not really. The story settled into the county the way all true local stories do, not polished but permanent. A moose stood in the road beneath the cliff. Drivers learned too late it was saving them. Years later, when newcomers laughed about country people and their animal legends, somebody older would always answer with some version of the same sentence. "You can laugh. Those folks on Route 7 aren't laughing." Hannah herself never told the story dramatically, When people asked, she described it simply. I thought he was blocking the road, she said. Then the mountain came down. That was enough, because in the end, no one there needed the story to become mystical to understand its weight. The pass had tried to kill them the ordinary way mountains do, suddenly, impersonally, without warning anyone in words. But that morning, warning had come anyway. It had come with hooves on wet asphalt, steam in the cold air, and a massive dark body that refused to move until everyone else did.